I'm Lois Donnelly, interviewing Professor Rosalind Gill on the 12th of May 2022 over Zoom. And we're discussing their life and career in the context of feminism and its history within psychology. So first of all then, could you tell me just a little bit about yourself? So maybe a little bit in terms of kind of the trajectory of your career and the topics of your work.
Yes, well, firstly, thank you so much for inviting me. And it's a real pleasure and a privilege to be doing this interview. Yeah, it's a real honour. And yeah, I was born in Manchester in 1963, so I'm very old. I've just turned 59. And one of the sort of defining experiences for me that I think probably led to me getting interested in psychology and sociology was that I moved around a lot. I mean, my parents just moved and moved and moved. So I was constantly kind of displaced as a young person. And 2 years was the longest that I spent in any school. So that kind of left its mark on me. And the other thing that really is probably quite significant to my biography and my future work is that I came from a very left-wing family. So my parents were both very sort of active politically, and yeah, we were that kind of family that sort of talked about politics and ideas all the time, and that's obviously central to who I am.
Yes.
So then I went to I was very involved in politics as I was growing up, and it was the 80s as I sort of came of age. So it was the period of Thatcher's Britain, and yeah, it was a period of the miners' strike. It was, you know, there was a lot of activism around anti-apartheid movement at the time, which I was really involved in, and also a lot of sort of anti-nuclear activism, both nuclear weapons and nuclear power. And that's kind of was like my gateway into politics, really, was being heavily involved in the kind of anti-war movement and anti-nuclear weapons. And I went to Exeter University to do my first degree, and I did a joint degree in sociology and psychology. And then I was very, very lucky when I was there to meet Professor Steve Riker, who's kind of was unknown then, but has now in the last couple of years become this really important voice during the pandemic, kind of, you know, talking and advising the government and writing a lot of opinion pieces. And meeting him was really, really significant because he kind of had this idea that psychology could and should be political, and that it shouldn't just be sitting on the sidelines, and that we as researchers have a responsibility to kind of use our voices and use our work to make positive social change. So he was hugely important. He put me in touch with and very much supported me to go and do a PhD, which I did with Michael Billig in Loughborough. And so I was part of the discourse and rhetoric group. Right. And so sort of that was kind of the beginning of my career. And then I've been very interdisciplinary in what I've worked on. So it's kind of cross-cutting with sociology, cultural studies, media studies, gender and sexuality studies. And obviously can say a lot more about any of those things.
Yeah, no, that's a great kind of introduction. I suppose kind of what is it like to work so interdisciplinary? Is that kind of quite a difficult thing to manage, or how do you find that?
Well, it's really weird, isn't it? Because it ends up being the only thing that you know. You know, the thing that you do is the thing that you know, so you haven't really got anything to compare it with. And, you know, I do sometimes, you know, have had that experience of feeling quite envious of those people that seem to be able to kind of plow a really sort of narrow field, and it's a very, very specific topic, and they work on it for years and they are the expert on that. Whereas I sort of feel that I'm the absolute opposite of that. I'm kind of interested in absolutely everything. Yeah. And so yeah, I'm always kind of taking, you know, something from politics, something from cultural studies, something from queer theory, you know, I'm just sort of bringing so many disciplinary kind of perspectives, but I like it.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It means that there's always kind of, yeah, something to draw on. Yeah, so what kind of first attracted you then to psychology as a discipline? Kind of why did you decide to go in that direction to university, or psychology and sociology, I suppose?
I suppose from my kind of background, I'd had that experience of always being displaced and never quite fitting in, and always feeling like I was on the outside, and never quite kind of like, I just make friends and then move schools yet again. And it was, you know, really, really profound thing to be just constantly moving all the time. And so I definitely kind of, yeah, had an interest in all those sorts of processes of inclusion and exclusion, and how groups work, and yeah, just lots of those kinds of things, but also the interest in politics. And I think a big question for me was kind of, why is it that kind of things that are not, you know, things that are sort of not beneficial to the very people that are involved in them continue for so long? And that could be kind of at the level of a relationship, you know, kind of, why is it that we stay in relationships that aren't working? Or, you know, why is it we stay with capitalism, which is clearly not working for the vast majority of people in the world? And yet we somehow remain trapped in its frameworks. So it's those sorts of questions that really got me interested in kind of ideology. And I think because I'd been kind of involved in activism, I'd had a lot of experience of kind of like leafleting and demonstrating and speaking to people on the street. And I kind of encountered this like real resistance to change. And I felt like there needs to be a psychological understanding to, you know, to bring to why it is that people, you know, and when I say people, I mean all of us. I don't mean, I'm not trying to sort of push it out onto other people, but why we get so stuck in things and find it so hard to change and move to something that could actually be so much better.
Yeah, that is very interesting. You're right. Yeah. Okay, that's brilliant. So that kind of took you to psychology and sociology, and then at kind of which point, maybe like in that journey, did kind of feminism come into it?
Well, I think I was very lucky. In my last year of school, I went to a further education college to do A levels, and I also did an art foundation course. And I met two people that were my sociology lecturers then, and they just sort of, I mean, it was a different era. It was 1979 when I was 16, and they kind of felt like your sociological education should be about kind of taking you on demonstrations and thinking about things that are happening in the world. So one of the very first things I got involved with through one of my lecturers there, Leslie Smith, was going on the anti-abortion, well, you know, the pro-choice, the anti-abortion bills.
Yeah.
Very resonant to the moment that we're living in right now, but going on those pro-choice demonstrations. So that was kind of my earliest engagement really with feminism, and then very much kind of in kind of parallel. So through the work that I was doing with like the campaign for nuclear disarmament, I was going to Greenham, and I was kind of at Greenham Common, and you know, part of that anti-nuclear movement, but also very much kind of in my work, I was coming across feminist ideas. And yeah, by the time I started my PhD, I was definitely a feminist.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So did it kind of impact your work going into your PhD, and in what ways?
Yeah, I mean, my PhD was about popular radio, and it was kind of about sort of radio stations like Radio 1 or commercial radio stations that, you know, most towns have, like in London, it's Capital Radio.
Hmm.
And it's kind of a radio that people used to talk about it as kind of like oral wallpaper, you know, it's kind of like wallpaper for your ears. It's like it's there, it's in the background, no one's really listening. You know, people might have it on when they're driving, or it might be on in factories, or just if someone's at home cleaning or whatever.
Hmm.
um, but it hadn't really been sort of studied as a medium, and I felt as if there were loads and loads of um, ideological messages that were in that radio kind of talk, that sort of DJ talk in between the songs, and that it was incredibly sexist, it was incredibly racist, it was kind of populist in its, you know, a sort of what we understand today as a sort of, well, post-truth populism. I think all those sorts of ideas were already there in popular radio at that time. So the PhD was very much a kind of feminist intervention that looked at that. So it kind of critiqued the talk,
Mm.
um, but it also looked at who's working in radio. So like why is it so white? Why is it so male dominated? And I did interviews in various different radio stations and asked about the lack of women. And that was really formative because it sort of got me to an understanding of just the thing that was really striking was that everyone I spoke to, the program controllers, were really kind of like keen to present themselves as very pro women, very feminist, certainly not sexist. And they kept on saying things like, well, there's certainly no sexism here, or there's absolutely no racism here, doing all those sort of disclaimers. And then they'd say, but you know, the audience just, they want a man, or women's voices are wrong for radio, or um, yeah, women just, they just don't apply. They just don't apply, or just, and they came out with this sort of litany of kind of excuses
Mm.
slash reasons, and it made me think about just how flexible sexism is. That sexism doesn't always come in this kind of obvious forms. That here are these guys being super positive about women. Oh, we'd love to have a woman. Oh, that would be great and stuff. And yet, actually, the effect of their discourse was to continue justifying not having any women.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, that's incredibly interesting. Absolutely. So that was kind of the beginning of, or I suppose, as you say, your identity as a feminist almost came out of that really early activism, and then more into your work kind of a bit later.
Yes, definitely.
Oh, amazing. So yeah, I suppose in a more kind of switching gears a little bit, in a more broad sense, did you have kind of any, I think you've touched on maybe a few people, but did you have any kind of key mentors throughout your journey and kind of throughout your career, I suppose?
I didn't have any formal mentors at all. I've never had a mentor. Would have loved it, but I do have so many people to whom I am hugely, hugely grateful. And I've mentioned a couple of them already, but I guess in terms of sort of, yeah, mainly sort of women mentors,
Mm.
I'd say Margaret Wetherell was really, really wonderful and supportive and academically brilliant kind of mentor. And she wasn't a mentor, but just someone that I knew and was so supportive and read work and just talked with me. And you know, when you're a PhD student, you just, well, I did anyway. I really kind of like, I really wanted to be having those conversations. I didn't want to just go out, you know, partying. I really wanted to kind of like be talking and feeling I was doing something that mattered and connecting and having those intellectual conversations that go into the night and stuff. And yeah, just to be able to have a few people like that that were also up for that and kind of very kindly, took me seriously enough to sort of involve me in things. That was really great. Um, Intellectually, I'd say Stuart Hall was just hugely important. And obviously, he's not a psychologist, he's a cultural studies person, but his work was immensely important. Angela McRobbie and Janice Winship. And then more kind of personally, when I went to work after my PhD, I got a temporary contract at Loughborough initially, and then I got another temporary contract at Brunel University. And there I met Anne Phoenix, who, became a wonderful friend and also, a wonderful sort of mentor informally. And I met MJ Barker there as well, also became a friend. And we've done so much wonderful work together. And Stephanie Taylor and Rose Capdevila and Paul Stenner, and yeah, and then I think through POWES I met so many inspiring people as well. I met Paula Reevy and Marcia Worrell and Wendy Stainton Rogers and Nicola Gavey and Sue Jackson from Victoria in New Zealand and Virginia Brown. I met all of these just amazing people. So that was something that I really kind of got through going to the Cumberland Lodge conferences.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. Yeah, that's good to hear. So that's how you crossed paths with them, is kind of through POWES and through going to those conferences.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, that's great. So I suppose that network of people kind of important to you, and how does that like impact your work?
I think they're all incredibly important to me. And I would also say, there's lots more people that are also very important to me. But I just want to quickly mention Sarah Riley as well, and Adrienne Evans, because their work's been incredibly important, and they're also friends and just really, really supportive and important scholars. So definitely. I mean, I don't want to be too emotional about this, but it's like it's the antithesis of growing up, because I didn't belong anywhere. I was constantly just up and moving on, and I just didn't have I've sort of missed out on having that thing of having friends from childhood, because I just wasn't anywhere long enough to kind of have those friendships. And I sort of feel like I've been lucky enough to make that in academia, with just meeting these just incredible people, really, really incredible. And that's been a real privilege.
Oh, that sounds really important, and kind of has an impact on you, and that's really interesting. Yeah, and I suppose the kind of a network of people who are like-minded as well, and that you can have, as you mentioned before, those conversations with, and kind of really talk about things as well that are important to you.
So important. Yeah, like-minded people. And on the space that POWES offered at Cumberland Lodge is just absolutely incredible. I think that's such a vital space, and that's been, my involvement has been so minimal, but just being able to go to 2 or 3 of the conferences there has just been really transformative. And it's just that combination of just like-minded, brilliant, politically engaged, great fun, really friendly, just everything about sitting together for meals and just sitting down next to somebody that you've never met and having those conversations just absolutely wonderful. It's been vital.
Yeah. Yeah, that is such an important kind of space, isn't it, as you say, to be in. And so, yeah, thinking more about POWES then, is, yeah, as you were saying, is that kind of all your involvement with POWES is mainly, was mainly going to the conferences? Have you been involved in any other ways?
No, I haven't been involved in any other ways. It's just, yeah, it's just been the conferences.
Mm.
Yeah.
But that was almost enough for you to kind of create that network and to feel like it was a space that you belonged in.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's really nice to hear.
Yeah. And no, I also just wanted to say something about Marcia Worrell, because obviously we've lost her, and that's just such a huge loss. And she was such a kind of big personality for creating that sense of community. And yeah, really, really want to acknowledge, yeah, how important and wonderful she was, and what a huge loss she is to our community.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree that, yeah, it's a very big loss indeed. Um, yeah, okay. So are there any kind of other feminist organizations then that you're involved with, kind of similar to POWES or anything?
Not exactly, but I would say there's two journals that I'm kind of, well, two or three journals that I feel really close to, and one of them is Feminism and Psychology, that just feels like, again, such an important space. And yeah, I mean, it's just those journals that you kind of look at first, and like F&P is one of them, and Feminist Media Studies for me is another one, and then there's another journal I look at a lot, which is European Journal of Cultural Studies, and I'd say they're all very much shaped by kind of feminist values. And I just know that I'm going to open the pages of that journal and find really interesting work. So I think those journals have also been really vital spaces. I've been kind of on the editorial board of each of them in different ways over the years.
Right, yeah.
Good.
Okay. Oh, that's really interesting. So yeah, that's how is that as kind of part of your career then, being on those kind of editorial boards? How does that kind of impact your work and your career?
Oh, it's hard to say, but I mean, it's all those review requests that just keep pinging into your inbox, and it's like, oh no, I'm sure I just did this like yesterday.
Yeah.
I got one recently where I swear I kind of only gave comments, and then it was a major revisions, and then it was back in my inbox a week later. I was thinking, how have they had the time? Yeah, but no, it's really good. I mean, it's lovely to be involved in that, and it's really, I think it's just kind of a space to try to be as a feminist and as a kind of feminist orientated journal, just to kind of have a different kind of ethics and way of engaging, and yeah, being supportive, and maybe signing your reviews. All of those kinds of things, I think, are really important. I mean, I
Yeah.
personally have had, like, at the beginning of my career, I had a horrible rejection that I wrote about in an article, and it just said something like, what's the difference between this piece of work and journalism? And it was just so kind of cutting, and it was just like a one liner, and it's like, that was the first thing I ever submitted to a journal. It's an American journal, and we all know it's so hard, and it's so hard for people at the start of their careers. It takes such a lot of effort and time in a context where you're already precarious and worried quite often, and then to submit something and get such a kind of cruel response is just brutal.
Yeah.
I think it's just so great that a lot of journals now are having a more kind of feminist approach, and hopefully trying to not have people having those kinds of experiences.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I suppose that idea of kind of that the more feminist journals are kind of quite different to the mainstream approach, and what a lot of people have experienced, as you say.
Yeah, yes. Sometimes, you know, now a lot of journals, they send you kind of like what all 3 reviewers have said. And sometimes,
Yeah.
you know, sometimes that's really depressing, and you just think, I mean, I saw one and it was something like, put this back in your drawer and don't look at it again for a few years. I mean, it was something really, really cutting. But mostly, I think you just see, I mean, I'm sometimes just absolutely impressed by how much people have written and how supportive, and they'll put like hyperlinks to things. Oh, you might like to look at this, and
Yeah.
you know, they'll actually put the link to the publication in the. I just think, gosh, it's really generative and
Yeah,
generous to do that.
absolutely. Yeah, that is really nice. That's the nicest kind of review that you could have, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I suppose still on the kind of topic of, I want to go back to kind of your work in more detail in a minute, but just still on the topic of kind of feminist organizations, you said that you have always really been into kind of activism and stuff. So what is your involvement with feminist activism like, and kind of what does that involve?
Yeah, I mean, very little at the moment, to be perfectly honest. Over the years, it's been extensive. I mean, especially when I was younger, in kind of, as I've already mentioned, like the anti-nuclear movement and anti-apartheid and anti-racist politics, and I was involved in the Nicaragua Solidarity campaign back in the 80s, been involved in sort of Stop the War movement and various kind of anti-austerity kind of politics things. To be honest, at the moment, I struggle to do anything, partly because of the academic workload, but also because I'm the sole carer for my mum and she has Alzheimer's. So that's taking a huge amount of time. But I do, I mean, I just volunteer at a food bank, and that's
great.
not really feminist activism, but it kind of is in a way when you see who's working there, and also when you see who's using that service. So yeah, that's just it's just a local thing.
That's really interesting. Yeah. So you see a lot of women at the service. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Definitely.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. Women who are, oh God, just women who feel so ashamed that they have to use that service and that they rely on it. And yeah, I mean, it's this country that should feel shame, you know, for putting people in that position, and it's just getting so much worse.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's the way that that plays out on individuals is just horrible to see. And like, aside from the food or, you know, products that are sort of donated, it just feels like the interaction that you have of trying to kind of at least try and like cut through some of that shame and say, this is not your fault and this is okay, and like this is just a community trying to support each other. That feels really important. Just some of those conversations feel really, yeah, really profound.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, that's very worthwhile, I think, of a kind of volunteering thing. And so you were saying as well about the kind of academic workload, and yeah, how do you find that, and could you tell me a bit more maybe about it?
It's impossible. I think it is just absolutely impossible. And I mean, for me, it's been impossible for probably about 15 years, I think I found it. The last 15 years it have
Mhm.
been just impossible. And I mean, it's probably because it is just objectively getting worse for everyone. They're just turning the screws on us, and they just want more and more from less and less. Um, I guess it is that. But it is just, yeah, I find it really, really, yeah, impossible to manage. And I think it's really hard to, because kind of I want to, I want to be, I love teaching, I love my students, I want to be a good teacher, and I want to be a good colleague, and I want to be a good citizen, and I'm, all of those things. But it's just, it's just literally impossible. And when I, um, you know, any ever switch off my email, it's just like they're just hundreds or thousands of emails in there, that I don't even get to open because, yeah, like for example, just now I took 2 weeks off
Right.
over Easter, actually, and this is again a kind of an indictment of the system. I had to take this annual leave so that I could actually do some of my own work
Right.
and finish this project that I was working on. But then I've come back, and I've been back at work for 2 weeks, and I still haven't had time to go back through the emails that came in. So I've got 3,000 like just unread emails in
Mm.
there.
Wow.
And then I'm getting the new emails coming in with people saying, I haven't heard back from you from my email of May the 2nd or whatever. And I'm just, oh God, it's not, and I hate to be that person, because that's not, that I am like super organized, and I'm always on email, and I'm always trying to get it, but it's just this impossible workload.
Yeah. Well, as you say, yeah, it's got nothing to do with you as a person, but with the system, I suppose. So
Yeah.
yeah, and particularly as a carer, that's a real thing on top of that as well. So yeah. Um, yeah, it's really interesting that it's gotten worse, kind of that you can see it getting worse. That's something, isn't it?
Definitely. And I've been involved in the strikes that I'm involved in my union, and I've been on strike over the last, well, last few weeks, but also last few years. Been
Mm,
taken strike action a lot, and one of our demands is around workload, the kind of concept of the unsafe workload. And it just feels like nothing's happening on that. We're not getting anywhere with it.
yeah, yeah, it's very slow. Um, okay, so switching gears a little bit again then. If we go back to kind of um, maybe, yeah, your work maybe in more depth, and kind of the first thing I wanted to ask really was, did you have any particular accomplishment or kind of piece of work that you're most proud of?
Um, well, I'm really proud of a book that's just come out this year, with my colleague and very dear friend Shani Orgad, and it's called Confidence Culture.
Mm,
And it's we've been working on it. Well, we sort of wrote our first piece about it in 2015, and we've basically she's a feminist sociologist in kind of media and communications, and she works a lot around motherhood and work. And I was kind of working around body image and sort of sex and relationship advice. Basically, we sort of had this conversation, and we realized we were both seeing these same confidence messages everywhere, and even the same kind of phrases and words were being used, um, about, women just need to be confident. So she was finding it in the workplace that women were just constantly being sent on these confidence training programs, as if that was the reason that they weren't kind of progressing up the organization.
yeah.
And I was finding it in all the kind of body image stuff. It was just about loving your body and feeling comfortable in your own skin. And then all this kind of advice to kind of take up more space in the world and change the way that you speak and practice this kind of verbal hygiene where you don't use the word just, and you don't say I'm no expert in this. We were seeing this kind of across all the spheres that we were working in, and we decided that we would start writing about it, and then it just turned into a book, and it came out this year.
Ooh.
And it's been absolutely amazing to see the kind of reaction that it's had. Really, it's really resonated with so many people.
Oh,
And
brilliant.
yeah, the sort of main thrust of the argument is that that confidence culture, it sounds like a superficially kind of feminist engagement, but actually it ends up saying change the woman, don't change the world. And it turns us away from broader structures, structural inequalities, and kind of the social transformation that's needed. And it just makes us do yet more work on ourselves and be yet more vigilant about how we speak, how we hold our bodies,
Yeah.
all that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's very interesting, that kind of self-surveillance and yeah. Wow, it sounds really interesting.
Thank you. It is. It's been so great. I mean, we're just like every day we get loads of messages about it from
Really?
people. And like next week, we're going to speak to the Women in Games Federation, which is a massive organization of games developers. And we're speaking to the General Medical Council next week. We've got
wow.
a big talk for them. And just, we're also speaking to a domestic violence charity. I mean, just there's been so much uptake, and it's almost like maybe post-pandemic, it's just sort of fallen on very receptive ears.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And so I suppose I chose a few things from your kind of vast career and work. And I thought kind of maybe one of your significant contributions was kind of discussion around post-feminism and stuff like that. And so I was wondering maybe if you could tell me a bit about that and how it's kind of developed over the years.
Yeah, thank you, Lois. Yes, it's yeah, I started writing about post-feminism partly, and it partly sort of relates to my PhD work and what I was saying to you about just kind of seeing how dynamic and how flexible sexism can be and how it can take so many different forms. And then it was sort of seeing kind of at a particular point, I think in the early 90s really, where, it's that kind of girl power moment and the ladette and all these sort of like seemingly positive kind of cultural iterations of kind of feminism in various forms, and the idea that we no longer need feminism as a social movement because actually, we're there already, and that kind of thing. And then it was just kind of starting to notice a really distinctive kind of pattern of ideas and feelings and practices that kind of kept on recurring, that were that seemed not exactly to be feminist in the way that I understood it, but they also weren't exactly anti-feminist. And so, yeah, there was a lot of writing about post-feminism then, and people were saying, oh, post-feminism's a backlash. And then some people were saying, oh no, it's actually a historical shift, and it's kind of like post-feminism's, become, it's just a new iteration of feminism. It's maybe third wave feminism. And some people were saying, oh, it's an epistemological shift. It's actually, this is feminism trying to take account of, intersectional differences. And I kind of coined a different way of thinking about it as a sort of sensibility, and just kind of just trying to, I mean, I didn't know when I wrote that it was going to be so widely taken up. I was just trying to make sense of it in my own head, and kind of going, it always seems to have these features,
Mm.
So these particular things going on, this sort of very individualistic tone that is kind of quite defiant and feisty, but somehow never ever talks about structures or, power really.
Yeah.
And a kind of, yeah, I guess the sort of sexualization of women's bodies, but wrapped up in a discourse of, hey, we can do this now because we're free and we've chosen it and we're autonomous. And it just seemed to be everywhere. Yeah, so that's kind of what I was writing about. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And yeah, as you say, has been kind of widely written about kind of off of that in multiple different ways. So yeah, it's such an interesting concept. Yeah, brilliant. And then I was also thinking about kind of how a lot of your work really focuses on maybe media and its effects on us. And that's obviously a really kind of fast developing thing over the last kind of 2 decades. And I was wondering, yeah, how it was, how it is to kind of work with that, and to yeah, see that developing so fast and kind of integrating that into your work, I suppose.
Yeah. Oh, it's been great. I mean, I'm always so behind. And I went to a conference this week and I was learning some new stuff about TikTok and just, oh, wow, just some of the incredible kind of feminist creativity that's going on.
Yeah.
It's just amazing. But yeah, I mean, I've always worked on media in a way since my PhD. So it's kind of, yeah, I feel like I am kind of a bit of a sort of media-y, culturally, feminist-y, psychologist-y kind
Yeah.
of person. But can I just mention one thing that I've
Of
been
course.
working on during the pandemic? Because I think this
Yes.
might be of interest. And it's specifically about social media. And basically, I started off doing some interviews with young people about their kind of experiences on social media. It was some men, mainly women, some non-binary people, and just started just having like quite a relaxed conversation with them about their lives on their phone in the context of lockdown and just sort of how it had changed. And because everyone was saying, I'm just sitting on my phone all the time, it's just there, I'm just randomly scrolling, and I
Mhm.
just wanted to know kind of a bit more about their social media lives. And that's what I've just finished just now. I've just finished drafting this book called, what's going to be called Perfect: Feeling Judged on Social Media, because it was absolutely incredible to do these interviews with young people and hear about how hard their lives are.
Mm.
And it just, obviously the pandemic really, so much illness, so much bereavement, so much kind of loss of employment, so much isolation and loneliness from schools, universities being closed, and so lots and lots of kind of like material things going on. But also they just really, really wanted to talk about their social media presence and how to present themselves, and just how hard it is with the whole kind of Instagram perfect life
Mm.
thing, not just perfect appearance, but the whole perfect life, the perfect friends, the perfect, restaurant, perfect bars, the best looking drink with the steam and the cocktail, just all of it, this sort of like Instagram perfect life and the kind of pressure that exerts, but then also just how silencing that can be, and how they can't talk about how they're actually feeling. And it was really interesting because I'd just done the confidence book, and at the end of that, Shani and I were really noticing what seemed to be like a turn away from confidence and a turn towards vulnerability. And it seemed like, celebrities were sort of coming out every day as kind of vulnerable, and my struggle with X, my struggle with Y. that kind of thing. But it didn't seem to operate at the level of kind of everyday people. And what young people were telling me, especially young women, was just that you literally just cannot be real, because if you do, you'll be seen as attention seeking. You know, if you post anything that's less than this kind of hyper perfect aesthetic, you'll be torn apart, all the kind of negative comments. And I think one of the things that just really, really struck me about it was that how lonely it is for them. And so it's this kind of paradoxical, very, very social experience. And they, in some ways, loving like seeing and being seen and being part of the flow of life and knowing what's happening and who's in and who's out and all of that. But at the same time, feeling incredibly lonely and feeling like even their closest friends are not necessarily people that they could be fully open with, because there's so much judgment all the time about everything. And the specificity of the judgment was just absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
So I'm sort of I'm living in my head at the moment, because I've literally just finished this draft and I absolutely loved it. And just feel like it was really important to, I feel like I'm holding their words very carefully and cherishing them, and trying to listen to them properly and capture the ambivalences of their experiences, because I just haven't seen it written about quite like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. Neither have I. And yeah, as you say, so important and so interesting, and particularly kind of in this period of time as well, where it's just so different and new. And yeah, absolutely, that sounds very interesting.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and I think there's something there about being so old, was that it just kind of, like, a lot of them kind of, I mean, some of them explicitly and some of them implicitly, but they all kind of positioned me as this sort of mum figure. And so I think I was seen as kind of like quite naive and but basically kind. And so at the end of it, it was quite profound, really, the number of people that sort of said, wow, this has been like a detox. This has been amazing, just being able to speak about this. And quite often they'd just tell me about experiences, like, for example, an experience of, they post something on Instagram and then they find out that it's been screenshotted by their close group of friends, and then in a kind of private Snapchat group it's been like torn apart. And
Wow.
they've just like horrible cruelty. And then I would just be kind of jaw dropping of like, God, this sounds really tough, that sounds horrible for you. And it was something about even just saying that made them realize, God, for the first time almost, how brutal that really is. And so it felt like quite an important space for them to speak.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Kind of, having you almost as an outsider, that they're kind of, telling about these things, that's a really interesting dynamic as well. It's definitely kind of a very new area, that people are trying to navigate, isn't it? And that's really interesting. And so I wanted to think about as well, I know you did a report on sexting with the NSPCC, and I think you've also worked with kind of a range of other official bodies, but I was wondering kind of what that process was like, and that kind of engagement with maybe a bit more of like the policy side of things, I suppose, rather than the research.
Yeah, Well, that was fantastic, working with the NSPCC on that report. It was good. I mean, it was a very, very small amount of money, and we were kind of, yeah, I think we just were sort of very lucky. We kind of got in at the end of the financial year, and there was some loose change in the
Mm.
budget. We did it very cheaply and quite quickly, and then we really kind of, yeah, really, really tried to change the conversation actually with the report, because I think in a way it prefigured a lot of the stuff that's come out more recently with things like the hashtag everyone's invited, and the kind of level of sexual harassment and bullying and actual sexual assault in schools, and
Yeah.
just how normalized that is. But at the time, the kind of prevalent policy discourses were around stranger danger. And we were kind of trying to say, no, it's not. That's, you know, most young people know about kind of not giving out their details to strangers online and stuff, but actually the real danger, especially for young women, is their peers and what's happening to them. So yeah, that was good. But do you mean sort of from a perspective of like how it was to work with the organization itself?
Yeah, yes, and any kind of other maybe policy focused work that you've done, like yeah, what is that kind of process like, I suppose?
Yeah.
Sense.
It wasn't as engaged as I thought it would be. So
Right.
it really was kind of, here's the money, you go off and do this, and then we kind of came back together for the launch and sort of had,
Mm.
it wasn't like they were kind of poring over the draft and saying you can't say this, or you you know, we
Yeah,
don't want you to say that. Um,
that's interesting.
and similarly, I did, for on this social media work, I submitted it to a government inquiry, and again, I mean, it was like minimal engagement really. I just kind of uploaded it through a website, didn't even really know if it'd gone. And then when I saw the report, there were like lots and lots of parts of it were quoted in the government report, but I hadn't had any kind of personal engagement with them.
Right.
And I suppose that's why the confidence culture book's been different, because so it's not been kind of so much government, but there's just been so many organizations that have said, please come and talk to us
Mm.
about this, because this is key for our members, or this is key for doctors to know about, or this is key
Yeah.
for games developers to know about, or whatever.
Oh, that's interesting. I wonder why there's kind of a bit of that difference. Maybe it's kind of the topic of the work, as you say, is so maybe relevant to now. But yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, yeah, it is.
Okay, perfect. So I suppose thinking about your career, do you play a role as a mentor yourself now?
I do, yeah. So I'm a formal mentor for several people in my university,
Mm.
and then I feel like I am an informal mentor for a lot of other people, and yeah, lots actually, lots. I've also got a kind of relationship with a couple of universities in Australia, and I have kind of formal mentoring relationships there. But more than that, I mean, I try to be well, a mentor, but I try to be supportive and engage with people's work and give give feedback on it, and just try and make myself as available as I can be to like help with things. And from it could be I get loads of kind of like A-level students saying, I'm doing my A-level project in on gender and media, please can you help me, could you could I speak to you for 5 minutes or whatever,
Yeah.
that sort of thing, up to kind of colleagues, yeah, all my kind of immediate colleagues, and lots of colleagues that I don't know will contact me and ask me if I'd mind advising them on something, or reading something, or helping them with a grant application, that sort of thing.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's amazing. So yeah, you seem to put a lot of kind of time and effort into that, which is on top of, you know, the workload that people.
It's really important to me, and I
Mm.
feel like we can be really good peer mentors for each other. You know, I don't think the way universities think of mentoring, it's somehow very kind of linear, isn't it, and hierarchical.
Yeah.
Actually, you know, like with this book that I've just finished, I've sent it to one of my PhD students. I've sent it to, you know, several kind of colleagues and friends to ask them if they'll give me feedback, and they do the same with me. And it's just nice to be in those supportive relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. Lovely. Okay, and so moving back to thinking about POWES a little bit and kind of the future of feminist psychology as well. Do you think that POWES in particular is kind of an organisation, do you think there could be any kind of changes in the way that you know, in its aims maybe, and projects and stuff like that?
I don't know. I mean, I suppose because my engagement with POWES is relatively limited. I don't know. I mean, I know it has its kind of policy engagement and kind of challenging marginalization and challenging inequality, and kind of being proactive about sort of feminist methods and feminist research, and that seems really, really, really vital.
Yeah.
I don't really know much about its work within the BPS. And I, to be honest, probably just don't know enough to be able to answer this properly.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, no worries. Well, I suppose maybe more broadly then, in terms of like feminism and psychology, what impacts do you think feminists have kind of made in psychology so far, and what do you think remains to be accomplished?
Oh, wow, that's a huge question.
Yeah.
I think feminists have made huge impacts, absolutely huge impacts in psychology. And it's just, I mean, over my lifetime in psychology, it's transformed. When I did my undergraduate degree, there was not a woman on the academic staff in the department where I was studying. There simply wasn't anyone, not even a woman teaching, let alone any feminist content, let alone anything centered on gender. I mean, there was nothing. And now I just thought that wouldn't be the case. I mean, the courses that are about gender, that are about race, that are about class, I mean, these are like the most popular courses. All undergraduate students want to be studying them. There's such an uptake. I still think there's just a lot of resistance. I mean, we've been going, well, I don't even think I can kind of dignify it with the kind of going through a process of decolonizing the curriculum. That sounds far too grand for what it is, but I think like most institutions, we've been trying to kind of look critically at our own practice and what we do, and think about the changes that need to be made, and just generally in terms of greater inclusiveness. And I think that what's been shocking for me, although I'm not in a psychology department, I still think it resonates, is how many male colleagues still, I mean, their curricula are just still so white, so male, so, you know, cis-normative, so heteronormative. I mean, it's just extraordinary, and it just feels like within feminism, or within the kind of critical areas around critical race studies. I mean, the debates are happening. There's so much exciting discussion happening all the time about all of these issues. But I still feel that there's areas of, and they probably are the biggest areas, it's just that I don't have all that much to do with them, thankfully, that remain entirely kind of untouched by all of the debates that we're all having.
Yeah, that's quite a bizarre thing to think, isn't it? That there's kind of almost a bubble of the field that, as you say, is just not thinking about those things that seem so prevalent in maybe our worlds or kind of sections of the field. So
yeah.
So I suppose, what do you see as the future feminist psychology then?
I think it's, I think it well, I don't know enough institutionally in terms of kind of how it's positioned really, but in terms of student interest and in terms of the impact that the work has outside the academy, I'm just even thinking of something like massive changes are happening, and psychologists are really involved in this. I'm just thinking of like the debates about the menopause and how that has gone from being invisible, completely invisible, as a kind of, biopsychosocial, cultural, political issue, to becoming kind of, you can't move for documentaries about menopause, for news articles about menopause, and for, medical, psychological discourses about it. I mean, that's because people have been active and they've tried to make a change. And likewise, in terms of just, gender identity, that's, what a huge transformation in the conversation over a few years. So, absolutely. I mean, there's just so much work to do, but I think that change is really happening, and sometimes it can feel like, oh God, it's too slow, but things are transforming.
It's nice to be able to see things happening, as you say.
What do you think? Am I allowed to ask you?
Yeah, of course. Unexpected, but yes. I don't know. I think, as you say, I think definitely students are kind of more engaged with that kind of aspect of things. And I think it's about making sure that the opportunity is there wherever students go to kind of open up that discussion and give them the opportunity to think about things in a more critical way and from kind of different viewpoints. I think that's where it all really starts, because I think once students start thinking about criticality and stuff, I think it's exciting, but it's just kind of giving them that opportunity to do it and to think about it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that really does. And does it feel as if the sort of the BPS kind of responding to pressure for change, and is it moving in a kind of progressive direction?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's still fairly mainstream, I would say, in terms of kind of mainstream psychology, and maybe that's where it focuses. But I think, within the BPS, like POWES is such an important section, and obviously also other sections like sexualities section and stuff. But yeah, it's I think there are kind of pockets of sections that are really good, and just such like as we were talking earlier, kind of an important community for people. I think that's where it's doing well, I think. But yeah, so I suppose my last question really is, what advice would you give to feminists or activists entering psychology now, or sociology even?
Well, I think it's, you know, as we were saying earlier, it's academia as a space is getting harder, isn't it? I think clinical psychology is also getting much harder. You know, NHS work is hard as well now, and I think it is getting harder. But I think, yeah, building a network, having kind of friendships and relationships of solidarity and care are really, really important, and they are the things that will get you through, definitely. And I know that we're all, apparently the ref results came out today, this very day that we're doing the interview, and I know that within academia we're all kind of quite mesmerized by those things. Our institutions are, at any rate.
Yeah.
And they do matter because they you know, they become mechanisms for allocating funding. But I do think that there's still a lot of space to do your own work and not be so kind of mesmerized by what the ref requires you to do, or, you know, what your impact requirement needs you to do. I think that, you know, there are spaces to do great work and critical work, and yeah, just working together and finding your people, and yeah, and taking care of each other. I think it's such an individualized place, and it's very, very, yeah, it's very hard. It's so hard for people, especially starting out, not to feel like imposters, not to feel like failures, not to feel like, oh, everybody else has got this sorted and it's just me and I'm not coping and what's wrong with me and all of that. And it really, really isn't. I think if we can break some of the silence around that and just say this is a kind of systemic issue, and actually we just need to find ways of making it more livable and caring for each other, then I think it can still be a really good place to be.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's such good advice. I will take it on board myself. Yeah, I think, yeah, that's all really important. And do you think it is more difficult for kind of people doing feminist work to meet those things like refs and those kind of institutional standards?
It might be within psychology. Yeah. I think it isn't within most of the rest of the social sciences. I don't think it is.
Okay.
I think sort of say within sociology, there's such a long and established and important tradition of feminist work. And in a way, that kind of feels like it partly is the mainstream. But yeah, in psychology, maybe it is harder. Just in terms of like having, you know, those lists of journals that are deemed the ones that you should publish in. That is really tough.
Yeah, that's interesting, kind of the difference maybe between those different fields, depending on, as you say, the history of the work that's been before.
Yeah. Yes. But then if you've been hired into a department, then that's in itself a statement of being, you know, your work being seen as valuable, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, true. Yeah. Okay, so I think I've covered everything. But is there anything else that I haven't mentioned that you'd like to, you know, talk about or touch on about yourself or feminist psychology?
I think just one thing I'd just like to say, which is, I think, sort of like one of the biggest pleasures of my career is and has been working with PhD students. I absolutely love it, and I've supervised 50 students to completion, and a lot of my PhD students are now even professors. It's just
Oh, wow.
amazing. I just heard about another student this week who's become a professor, which is just fantastic. And yeah, it's such, I mean, it kind of goes to your question around mentoring, because it's sort of a kind of mentoring, but it is such a pleasure. And what I feel that is, yeah, it's been amazing. It's been amazing working with those people, but it's also been incredible now how they've gone from being students to being friends and peers, and how it just feels like we're in this kind of peer network of real support and solidarity and care. And yeah, it's just, yeah, I think I'm just thinking that, you know, we can build these things, we can do these things, we can build them ourselves. And yeah, just needs one or two, and then three, and then four people, and we really can make quite a big difference to the kind of like emotional texture of our lives and our institutions' lives, just by doing things differently.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really nice to see, to see that developing, as you say, kind of almost, in front of your eyes, that is possible. Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good point.
Resist this competitive, isolating, individualizing, toxic culture.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is, kind of particularly within institutions and universities, I think.
Yeah.
So just for the record, could you state your gender, please?
Yes, I am a woman.
And your place and date of birth?
22/4/63, Hyde in Manchester.
Lovely. And your occupation?
Professor of Social and Cultural Analysis at City University of London.
Lovely.